Hello, everybody, and thank you very much for your patience tonight. We have definitely had an interesting something. Anyways, we're here now, and that's what matters. I hope everybody enjoyed the weekend. Apparently, it's going to snow here on Tuesday,
What?
but that's okay. Just a little bit. It's not like real snow. It's not like it's going to stay. I'm sorry for being Debbie Downer there, but I think that's a really great part about being here in Canada. I remember when I didn't live here and it was like sunny or rainy and it was like always like 90 degrees. And that sounds really nice. And for some people, that's wonderful. But what I love about being here is like now I can see all the green. I hope you guys, when you're out for your walk, right, you see the green because this is all about growth, right? This is like a very exciting time. And that leads us right into tonight where we're continuing. I know last week, Ayesha took me on Ayesha, Demi McGuade, I get to do my shimmy. Thank you and welcome.
And the lovely Gwenda Lambert.
Yeah, but it doesn't go shimmy. It's like, I feel like it's like, anyways, doesn't matter.
Here she be, Gwenda Lambert.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Little Vogue.
Exactly. We have to do some sort of dance. That will come up with that. So thank you again. We were just talking briefly that last week, Ayesha led me on the journey of what I had gone through in therapy or therapeutic journey, because this is really not necessarily about anything that we've been through specifically, but the journey through the therapeutic world, right? Because I know that your experience was much different than mine. And next week, we're going to have Victoria back again, who is a holistic psychotherapist. And we're all going to talk about how to find a good therapist, or really how to look for therapies that help you. Because last week, and I'm sure we're going to find out this week, we get into all different kinds of modalities. So are you ready to launch in, Miss Ayesha?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
I know it's kind of weird, right? Well, thank you for being vulnerable and sharing your story, because I know people watch this, even if it's not high engagement, but with this kind of chat, sometimes that's exactly what it's about, right? Is knowing that people have a place to go to get general information, just some sort of information that helps them on their way.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. What was your introduction into the therapeutic world?
So coming from kind of like a childhood trauma background that stayed with me for quite a while into my early 20s. And that's really when I started my therapeutic journey. So I was in university. I talked to a counselor there. That was my kind of initial start into it. And I don't think I really knew what to expect. I don't think I knew what, I think that a lot of people, when they go to any kind of healthcare provider, they really don't know what to ask, what kind of questions to ask, how to kind of say, well, or even what they want. Like sometimes you don't even know what you want, right? And so you're really, I think in therapy, a lot of times you're led by the person that's in front of you. I had a very nurturing therapist. I had someone who was very kind and was very supportive, right? And that was great. And it really gave me a place that I needed to talk about stuff and validate myself. And it wasn't a very in-depth thing at that time. It was just something, because I was so young and I didn't know what I needed. I didn't know what I wanted. So it was just really about kind of talking through some of the experiences that I was having at that time. And after just kind of as I was finishing university, I moved to Toronto, and more stuff kind of started coming up around the trauma from the past. And I'm someone who has a lot of gaps in my memory, and that really plays havoc with how I navigate life, because people will say to me, well, I remember you said this, or I remember you said that. And I don't have those memories, right? And what's also challenging is that when you don't remember things that people tell you that you said, you're really relying on them to tell you what was the essence of what you said. And sometimes they are interpreting it from their own lens. they're coming at it from their own point of view. So you might have said something, they might have heard something different. And then when it's said back to you, you don't have the memory to say, well, actually, no, that's not what I meant, or that's not what I said. I actually said this, or I actually meant that. And that caused a lot of problems for me in certain situations with, various people in my life. And I found that to be really, really challenging. And I also found that because of that, because of those memory gaps, I also felt very insecure about how I was navigating things, because I was constantly second guessing myself. Did I say this? Did I mean this? What was happening? And that's not a really easy place to be, and also in those situations um, where there were a lot of, uh, I had certain people in my life that I was arguing with a lot, right? And in those moments, I also found like I really lost my voice, you know? I wasn't able to articulate because people would be very strong in their opinions. And because I didn't have that memory to back me up, I found like I was also losing my voice. So at one point then, I think I did see another therapist. Again, it's been really interesting to see how over the years, what I've learned is around therapy is that just like with your medical healthcare provider, you have to manage this process. You actually have to know, what is it that I want to work through? What do I want to feel at the end of it? What kind of skills do I want to walk away from? Because I did find going through therapy that as I went through different therapists in my adult life, that I had a lot of space to talk about things. I had a lot of space where people validated me. And that was really important to me at that time, to be validated and to have that space to talk. But I did end up feeling after, 5 or 10 years of therapy that I didn't feel like I really got anywhere. I didn't feel like I was really given tools about how I can handle things and what I can do. I was given some, and no question, there were a few that I used quite a bit. I remember one of my therapists telling me that whenever you're in a situation where somebody demands an immediate response, she said, don't give it. Just wait and respond when you're ready, right? And that was a very valuable tool, something that I share in my own program around taking a pause. It's such an important thing, right? So there's that. But there were spaces where I actually couldn't connect what I was experiencing in therapy to real life.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Like sometimes you're in that therapeutic space and you feel like you're in a bit of a bubble, and you feel you're safe. You can say whatever you want. You can, but then you go out in real life and you don't feel any different. You feel the same.
Mm-hmm.
I felt very much like I was the same. I felt like I still don't know how to handle things. I still don't know how to deal with my emotions. I still, it kind of also became this really kind of codependent thing where I needed to talk to my therapist, where if I was having some kind of crisis, then I needed to be on the phone with her, because I didn't feel like I could really take care of it on my own. Right. So that was also part of my journey. So it started out with university. It started out with me really not knowing, relying on the person that I was going to help me kind of navigate. And then it grew into, uh, as I went through the years, it grew into this kind of safe space where I could go and talk, but where I couldn't take all the tools and come out and feel like I could really deal with the world.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that you've hit on like so many key things. And that is the good thing about any kind of therapeutic conversation. And I'm going to talk because this is talk therapy. Talk therapy can be with a therapist. It can also be with a friend who's holding space for you. Right. And I think that, the key thing there that you were talking about is almost like the business model of being a therapist, is that it's almost like you're going to be their patient for the rest, or their client, or whatever it is, for time immemorial, instead of actually getting it to say, here's my goal, and here's, these are the kinds of tools. So thanks for sharing that. I think that's, and the other thing that I think people, the doubt that you get, that you just talked about with, the fact that when you have trauma, the gaps in your memory are normal, but until you talk to somebody who's trauma informed, you just doubt yourself, because it's like, oh my God, I can't remember. I don't remember that. Right. So
Yeah.
way to go. So other than talk therapy, what are the other kinds of modalities that you came across, or what did you find the most beneficial between then and now that's helped you really move forward?
I think that for me, I tried a little bit of energy work as well. I had some friends who were Reiki masters, and they did some Reiki with me. I went to someone who was an energy healer. And that was an interesting experience, because I did feel like there were some things that I walked through with her that were really helpful, and that were really, what's the word I'm looking for? They were really helpful, and they were also very insightful, because I gained a lot of, kind of just by listening to the way that she was talking. And she is the kind of energy healer that talks about also past lives, talks about different, different ways of healing that are not necessarily related to this plane, that are related to another plane, right? And then close to the end of our session, she did say to me also that, if you're ever interested, I also do sexual energy healing work.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, thank you. Because that was something that came really out of the blue. And I wasn't sure that I was necessarily comfortable with that. But it was certainly an eye opener for me. But I have to say too, and I wanted to just also share this, is that when you're looking for a therapist, you really do need to have to go into it with your eyes wide open, right? Because otherwise you can find yourself in a potentially compromising situation, or a situation that you don't want to be in. I had an experience where I decided that I wanted to maybe try and work with a male therapist, right? And go and see them. And I did find a male therapist, and the therapist seemed to be fine through the session. And then we closed out with a meditation, and the meditation went kind of like, I want you to close your eyes, and you feel a soft breeze, and it's touching your cheek, and now it's touching your neck, and now it's going between your breasts, and now it's going, down your legs, and the session had been fine. It had been fine right up until the end. And then when that happened, I was like, nope, not coming back to this dude. That's done. But a lot of people, when they're in that situation, they're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. And I definitely felt like I was in that freeze mode in that situation. I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I was, at that time, as he was saying this, I certainly wasn't relaxed. I was definitely in a very hypervigilant state. And so I was just like, but nothing happened. I left there, but I never went back, right? So I think that you have to be very aware that there are some people that are, that are abusive with their power as therapists as well. And you have to be mindful of that, right? So in my therapeutic journeys, I've also encountered people who have potentially brought something sexual to the table when that's not what I was there for, right? And so being aware of that, I think, is very important to really understand how different people operate. You might not even think, like, you might think, oh my God, like you went for therapy and this happened. yeah, you go for therapy and sometimes some crazy shit happens and you have to kind of just really be aware, and you have to stay in your safe space and really ask a lot of questions before you get there, right? So I think we're going to talk about this with Victoria next week, but asking, like, when I was looking for therapists, I mean, the closer I got to this point in my life, when I was still looking for therapists, I was reading their biographies. I was looking at what are the things that they actually do. I was looking at which kind of clients they see. Uh, I was looking at their experience. When I got them on the phone, I would say things like, "What is your method of, uh, you know, therapy? What kind of work do you do? Is there any kind of homework that you assign? How often do I need to see you? You know, these kinds of things." Like I would, and what's your what's your take on trauma? You know, how have you dealt with people with trauma before? Things like that. I started to learn how to ask those questions. And I also just want to say, for people who are interested in sexual healing work, energy work, that's great. I'm not putting anybody down. I'm not saying anything about it. If people are interested in it and it works for them, I think that's fantastic. But what I'm saying is that if that's not what you're looking for, then you have to also be very clear that that's something that you're not looking for, right? And uh, be very direct when you're with someone. Also, there's that power dynamic in the therapist-client relationship where you think that you can't question your therapist, you can't ask your therapist questions, you can't change the direction of your therapy, you can't ask for a different methodology, and absolutely not. You're a client, you're a paying client, so you have every right to say, I don't want you to do this. I don't want to talk about, I don't want to do it this way. I want to find a different way to do this. This isn't working for me. What's the methodology you're using? What's the rationale behind it? You are in a partnership with your therapist. This is not in a power imbalance. So you have every right as someone who's paying for this service to question what you're getting, and uh, whether it's useful to you and how you want to adapt it for yourself if you need to.
Awesome. I mean, and I think again, just your insight is fabulous, and I really loved how you talked about, because as I talked about last week, it's like the Pez dispenser, right? You can take off a layer and something else comes up. But that being said, listening to what that male therapist said, if I was in a red tent goddess ceremony, that would be a completely different energy
Yeah.
than talking about it in a one-on-one talk therapy session.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that that's important as well, that the one thing that you're talking about is making sure, like, because there's a lot of these days, there's a lot of coaches that teeter the line, and they have a lot of, there's trauma informed courses for yoga instructors, so on and so forth. And I think the one thing that was interesting that you talked about is that when you first go into therapy, you don't even know what you're doing. Like, it's almost like you're looking for the yellow brick road, and you don't want to know that the wizard's got no power at this point. You just want to know where the yellow brick road is, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it can be confusing, and that's where the interview process that comes, because I mean, there's more and more information about that out there now, but I think that's probably the most valid thing. You're in an interview, you're interviewing them. This is your hour, not their hour. And again, getting back to that codependent, right? Is it like, even asking them if, how does your therapy go? Do you want it so that you're not going to be, that I'm not going to need you in X amount of time?
Yeah.
Or is this a 10-year process, right? So, and also I think the thing is that the one thing you talked about again before is that some of that self-doubt, because then you have to find your own voice. So it's interesting that at the beginning you were finding that it was taking away your voice more because you doubt yourself. You still have all these trauma related things, and nobody's even told you about that. Yeah, these are all valid, these are all real. But then again, I think the great thing these days is that there is more of the GABA Mates out there and all the trauma informed stuff, so that helps as well. So if you were, I guess, at this point in your growth, because we're always learning about ourselves. That's how I see it. Is what would be your next steps? Like, is that something that you feel is an ongoing process for you? Do you find, because I love your course, you mentioned your course, and again, anybody that's looking, you can still catch up in this. And I love it because every month you take people through a different intentional review, right? It's not even an introspection, it's a review, sort of saying where do you stand right now in this aspect. Whereas, you can only go retrospect once you've been through. So all that being said, do you find it almost more therapeutic now that you're designing your own in a coaching format? Do you find, and the work that you do in equity and leadership and diversity, do you find that is cathartic in itself, or does that lead to, and how do you deal with that uncovering of other stuff as you go along?
That's a great question, Glenda. Thank you for that, because I think that, this brings me to another point in therapy. And I also want to say that I know I've talked a little bit about the things about therapy that didn't work for me, but I do also want to say that there were a lot of times that therapy did also work. So there's a balance, right? Because there were times where I felt invalidated, I felt unseen, I felt unheard, and I needed that space to be able to talk about stuff. I needed that safe space to be able to talk about things. And I think that what happens is that when you stabilize enough that you can start using your voice, that you do start feeling like you matter in situations, that you want to really be able to take steps in your life that are stronger, that are bolder, that are more open to the goals that you have in your life, then your attention starts to shift from the insecurity part to what you want to work on and where you want to go, right? And I think that if you have a therapist that can grow with you, that's amazing. To find someone who you can constantly be adapting yourself with and say, I'd like to work on this, and I'd like to work on this, and they give you what you need. I think that's a fantastic thing. Or if you're able to say, okay, I think I've come as far as I can with you, now I need to work with somebody else, then to be able to articulate that. I think that's pretty much what happened to me. I went through therapy as much as I needed therapy to support me in that period of my life. And then I realized that there were other things that I wanted to do. And so what I also realized was that in finding those other things, one thing that I did was also go back to my own roots. And I realized that the interesting thing about therapy is that if you are a person of color, if you come from a different culture, that sometimes the therapy that you get is not culturally aligned to you. It's not aligned with the values that you have. So there can be times when you're with a therapist, when something they're saying, and they're saying it very strongly, that they recommend that you do something, or they suggest that you do something, and it's really not aligned with your cultural values, or it's not aligned with the way that your family operates, then you have to kind of start thinking about how do I adapt? How do I move? How do I change? And how do you, as a therapist or any kind of educational consultant, how do you provide information that is accessible to people at different cultural levels, with different values, in different spaces? Because you sometimes can't apply the same theory to everybody. So for example, you can say, I used to have these conversations with my therapist around my relationship within my family. And when you come from trauma, when you're in a single parent household, you occupy a certain space, you occupy a certain role in your family. And even when you want to change that relationship, sometimes you can't do it the way that your therapist is telling you. You need to find a different way to navigate that, and a way that you can live with. Because at the end of the day, when you leave that office, the therapist is not coming on with you. It's you're in that space all by yourself. So you have to find a way to kind of mesh those things together, right? So doing the DEI work, doing the work in the program, developing my own program and processes, allows me to actually take some of the components of what I've learned through therapy and through other modalities and through my own work as a coach, my own learning as a coach, my own personal professional work, and kind of try and weave it all together in a way that is more accessible to people and that allows people to think about things from multiple points of view, because we're not we're not linear. And I think this is the thing too around therapy, is that we're not linear. Situations aren't linear. The people we're dealing with are not linear. So the skill that we need is the skill to be flexible, the skill to be agile. That's what we need. We need to learn how do we move from one situation to another? How do we take a situation and try and shift it so that it has a better outcome for everybody involved, right? Including us. So it definitely changes the way that I think about how to help people. One of the reasons I became a coach was because I only got so far with therapy. Then I needed somebody to help me. I needed some direction. And where do I go from here now that I'm feeling stable? Where do I go from here? How do I move forward? And so it made sense, because I was sharing my own journey. I was sharing what I had learned with other people. So I think that's a great question in terms of, you know, how your own work informs and is informed by your therapeutic journey.
Exactly. And so that brings up again another really great question. And that is, as we said, like coaches are sometimes straddling that therapeutic. So in your experience, how would you define the difference between a coach and a therapist? So, and it's so just from again, a beginner's standpoint through your experience.
So coaches are not psychotherapists. They're not licensed. They don't have, um, degrees or diplomas in psychotherapy or social work or anything like that. And so the coaches the the coaches foray is the present and the future. The coach's foray is not the past. A therapist foray is the past, is when you have someone who's digging into your, why do you feel this way, what happened to you, tell me about what you're feeling, explain. Like that's what your therapist is supposed to do with you, is to walk with you and make sense of and understand your experiences that happened in the past, and what kind of impact they've had on you, right? And how to move through that with with a different understanding. Okay, with coaches talk to you where you are right now, and some of them might say, okay, they might talk to you in terms of what's your limiting belief. They might talk about what are things that are holding you back. What are some challenges that you have in the present moment. They're not going to they unless they have a psychotherapy degree as well, they shouldn't be talking to you about what kind of trauma you experienced, or what kind of relationship you had with so and so, and how did that impact you, like, because that's not really our foray. And when you are dealing with somebody who's a coach and they're talking to you about that stuff, I think you're within your rights to ask what are your qualifications, what can you ask about, because the coach is supposed to talk to you from the present looking to your future, and your therapist talks to you about you in your present from your perspective of your past, right?
How your
There's
present was formed from the past.
that's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a little bit of overlap, like I said, in things like your mental processes, your core beliefs, things like that. Yes, things like that, of course. But you know, spending hours talking about your experiences, no, that's not the job of a coach.
Very good point. Very good point. And just because I just want to get clear on one other thing, and again, we'll probably get into this more next week, and that is when it comes to diversity. Does it matter? When does it matter that your therapist has an understanding of where you've come from a cultural standpoint? Like if there's any, like, is that something that was that you would have any kind of insight to, like, how the brain works, how the mind works, how we're programmed, all that kind of stuff is the same. What we're programmed with can be different depending on what world we grow up in, right? Like, strong cultural backgrounds, can have a big influence, strong religious backgrounds can have a big influence. So I'm just curious if that's just because I know that I love your work, the work that you do with your diversity training. And if anybody's looking for somebody to come into their office, I can speak so highly of what Ayesha offers. But it's because of those conversations that I'd love to have your insight in this.
In the coaching world in particular, there's starting to be some conversation around the need for the need for diverse openness to diversity. So for example, when you're coaching somebody, if you're a professional coach and you're coaching somebody in leadership, or you're coaching someone in business, or you're coaching someone about how to advance themselves professionally, if you're not aware of things like systemic racism or exclusion or barriers in the workplace, then you're doing a disservice to your clients, because you're not allowing for that conversation to happen and to really explore what are the issues and what are the things that the client actually has to deal with. So I think that from a therapy point of view, that's equally as important. And in hindsight, there, looking back on some of my experiences in therapy, because I had, this kind of balance between my cultural upbringing and the place that I've grown up in, which is predominantly North America, right? That I have these two different sensibilities and different mentalities. So the part of me that is, railing against the cultural boundaries and the cultural restrictions was very happy to hear a therapist talk about, this is what you should do, and this is why you should do it, and all this stuff. What I think that what I could have really benefited from was a therapist that would have helped me to heal both things and integrate both of those things. And I didn't have the understanding, let alone the language, to be able to ask for that, or to look for that, for that matter, right? Because this is, you don't necessarily think about it, but when you're living in you're occupying two completely different spaces, you end up choosing one to the detriment of the other. And I do feel like I wish that I had had that opportunity to bring those two worlds together and integrate them better, because I think I would have different relationships with people. Not that I'm not one of those people that regrets things.
No.
I don't think about things and go, I wish this was completely,
No.
And I don't blame myself or the therapist.
No.
I just wish that I had that sensibility to understand how much at this point in my life, in my 50s, that I would look back on that and think, I wish that I had had that opportunity to really integrate and heal both parts of who I am, And I think that when you don't have that lens, that diverse lens, and you don't have to be, for me, you wouldn't have had to be a a South Asian therapist, or I had tried to go to a male therapist. Like, gender is not an issue, right? It's just someone who is open and understands that there's intersectionality that exists in all of us. How do we, if we really want to heal, how do we do that in a holistic way? How do we do that in a way that keeps us as people whole and integrated and feeling comfortable with all parts of ourselves,
Beautiful. Well said. Eloquent as always, which is, I love it. And again, I think that's the whole thing. It's not that somebody has to look or be a certain way. If you do have that male therapist, they need to be able to have an understanding of some of your, and we can never be something that we're not, but we can be aware of and study now. Like, and that's the whole thing. Back in the day, it wasn't even that was necessarily an option, right? Never mind, and I'm going to use this word, the arrogance of some that would think, well, of course, I've been to school, I know I can do that. So there has to be a certain part on coaches being able to say, hey, man, we're going into a therapy line now. This is not my cup of soup. You need to go somewhere, and to have that business connection where you can hook people up with somebody like a Victoria, for instance, who
Yeah.
can take that. And then maybe you can coach them later on down the line. But there has to be, and I think one of the best things that you talked about early in this conversation is that these people, all these people, you are hiring them. They are part of your healing team. They are part of your team. And so, and I think one of the reasons why we're doing this is because we want it so that if anybody is where we were 30 years ago, that they can ask better questions. They can have a little bit more knowledge when they're actually coming into this journey and starting steps to get to an understanding of themselves.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And I really love what you just said about being able to share your connections with people, with the right people, right? So I can teach people how to fortify themselves internally. But if I wanted someone who needed self-defense training, I would send them to you. I'd be like, yeah, I have a great friend. She's amazing. You should go and try her courses, right? Because that's what we should do. And that's also, as professionals, as therapists, as coaches, then it's to have that, to get out of that scarcity mentality that, oh, if I give away my clients, I'm not going to get any more. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The more you give, the more you get, right? So just keep passing people along. And also sometimes it's not the right fit. You don't want to have people keep coming to you if they're not the right fit for you, right? I also think that, one thing around, one thing that I've learned over the years is that um, the issues, they don't go away.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing goes away.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't, and to be whole, to be your whole integrated self, you don't actually want things to go away. You just want to be able to, you want to be able to hold them and hold yourself differently when you're experiencing them, right? And I talked about this yesterday as well, that it's about learning to walk. Sometimes you're walking in close proximity with something, sometimes you're a little bit distant, sometimes you're walking ahead of it, sometimes it's all you see in front of you, right? It's just being able to navigate that movement in a way that flows, in a way that helps you to ride it out, right? Because it's all ebb and flow. And sometimes when you think you're completely over something, 4 years later, 5 years later, boom, there it is right in your face again. And if you don't have those skills to be able to adapt, to be agile, to be flexible, to be able to be responsive rather than reactive,
Absolutely.
then you're going to find yourself feeling that instability, that loss of voice, that, and you don't want that. You want to learn those skills so that anytime you hit a wall or you hit something that you're not expecting, that you're able to walk through it, and you're able to do it. Every time you do it, it gets easier, you get more confident, it's less intense, it's less frequent, and you stay stable. You
Mm-hmm.
stay stable through it, right? So I think that that's a really important thing to remember through therapy, is that therapy is not, it's not going to fix, it's not going to fix you.
No.
It's not going to fix your life, because first of all, there's nothing wrong with you. And second of all, there's nothing wrong with your life. This is all perspective. It's how you're walking through it, and you have the capacity to be able to change that. And even when you're the victim of something, these are difficult things to deal with, but you have the strength and you have the power to take it back and to be able to walk through it on your own terms. And that's the bottom line. And if your therapist doesn't tell you anything else, that is what your therapist should be telling you, right?
Absolutely.
I do
Amen.
wish, sorry, just one more thing I'll
Oh,
close out with this is just around the accessibility of therapy. I think that it should be it should be accessible. I think when you're looking for a therapist, make sure that you ask about sliding scale, see if there's some way to maneuver. If you like someone and you want to work with them, most likely, if they're a good therapist, they will find a way to help you out and to work with you and to accommodate what your budget is, right? So also look for that. So don't necessarily just go with who fits in your scale. See if you can go with someone that you really like and that you trust and that you have a good relationship with when you're interviewing them, because that's the important thing, is to interview each of your therapists before you start with them. And then just ask them, what can you do something for me? Can you be a little flexible? Because especially at this time in COVID, where people are going through a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, there's been a lot of loss of life, loss of income, loss of livelihood, loss of business, right? And we know that there's people that are experiencing violence and abuse in their homes in this lockup, right? So whatever is available, try and look for those resources. There's also a lot of free resources online as well, meditations, all kinds of different practices that people can tap into as well. And there are some therapy. I think we posted some resources, right?
yeah, last week for sure.
Yeah, we did. So we've offered a bunch of those as well for anyone who's looking for those.
And thank you so much, Aisha. You're amazing. And again, I mentioned it a little bit on the little tags that I've had, but we are moving to this Just Talking page, which is just for this show.
Thank you, Glenda, for setting that up. Yay.
Yes. And so the great thing with this is that we can actually set up resources there, and we are going to set up resources there. So because that's the whole thing is, I know if I had my druthers, and it sounds like we had the good part is that your first experience was done at your own direction. And I think that it does give you a little bit of at least anything that we do, as long as it's positive for the first time, even if we don't get everywhere that we need to get. And this is really key for anybody that's doing any kind of coaching, training, doesn't matter. You need to be able, it has to be a positive experience. If it's not a positive experience, you're not going to come back. And so that's why, people talk about mindset but it's not toxic positivity. It's really about resilience. It's really about knowing, hey man, look at what I've already gone through and I'm still standing. And I every time I say that, I see, Elton John, I'm still standing. Yeah. So, but again, I think this is interesting because again, our journeys are, it's come, and next week will be amazing with Victoria, and we will probably put a little bit more structure to this, although it'll still just be a conversation, because I think that's how we get the most out of things, right? Because if we think too much and we plan too much, is there anything that came out tonight? I know for me last week, there was a lot of stuff where it was like, wow, that was interesting. I just talked about that. Like, was there any kind of ahas that you got out of tonight as well? Just being in the hot seat?
Yeah, I think it's just a reminder about just cultivating one's own inner strength and one's own trusting yourself. I think it was a reminder to me about that, about what that looks like, what that feels like, and also the journey itself, because you don't often get a chance to really reflect on something like your own healing journey. Mm-hmm. You just sit back and you go, oh, well, I did this, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then you get this real opportunity to kind of see the depth and breadth of the work that you've done, and that's really a gift. So thank you for that.
This is where we both go like this, right? Go ahead, pat yourself on the back, right? It's like, I think that's half of it is, and that's really what I love about this as well, is that it just starts as a conversation, and it's just about those insights and taking that time to celebrate the wins. and being present. So here we are. That's like an easy hour, which again, thank you for everything. So next week, Just Talking is going to be here with our resident psychotherapist. Well, at least that's what I'm calling her now. So Victoria will be back with us next week. And so if there is a question, if there's anything that you want to know about looking for a therapist or any kind of therapeutic process, please let us know. And thank you, Ayesha. I love you dearly. And we shall see you next week. Yeah. And again, if you guys want to sign up for a course, she's good. And if you want your company to get some diversity training, she's also fabulous. So
thank you, lovely. Thank you.
And seriously, I just mean that because I've taken her course and it's fabulous and it's eye-opening. And I think that's, you know, out of anything, it doesn't matter what you think you're saying, it matters what other people are hearing. So in this world, that's the one thing, is that hopefully your conversations, the people on the other side will understand that you're trying to understand them, or that you're trying to connect, and keeping that, you know, an openness, a flow, right?
100%. Yeah.
Okay. Love you dearly. We'll see you all next week.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Take care.
Okay.